The Color Success Podcast support the Department of Health and Human Services COVID-19 education campaign We Can Do This efforts to increase education and awareness about COVID-19 vaccines. Whether due to language barriers or lack of access to healthcare, many Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders face unique challenges to getting accurate vaccine information. We hope that amplifying these resources, especially in other languages, will help reach and protect our most vulnerable communities. Please visit vaccines.gov for more information. Welcome to Season 2 of the Color Success Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Michelle Chu is the founder and CEO of Kono's Kitchen, a brand of freeze-dried raw dog treats inspired by our rescue dog Kono, an American Staffy mix who went from street dog to Chief Derp Officer of his own company in less than 2 years. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in psychology from UC San Diego, Michelle lived in Beijing for 5 years, working in startups before moving back to Los Angeles and working her way up to Director of Technology at a global digital marketing agency. She is passionate about dog training and nutrition, building community, and supporting other businesses owned by women of color. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So, we connected over having dogs and your business and talking about San Francisco. And so, you've had a really interesting story. You used to be very competitive in terms of athletics, and obviously you've lived in different parts of the world. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey from, competing and what kind of transpired from there?
Sure. I think when it comes to sports, it's sort of a chicken or the egg type of thing. I think personality wise, I've always been fairly competitive, even as a kid. I remember being really competitive. I've always been really loyal to the group around me. So I'm not somebody who has a ton of different social groups and a huge social group, but I'm somebody who I've got a very small circle, but I will do anything for them. And that kind of comes into play when it comes to sports too, and just being part of a team and putting the team first. And then I've always, as a kid as well, I was more introverted. I think I've kind of moved over towards the middle a little bit more, where I'm a bit of an extrovert and an introvert. But as a kid, I would put myself out there a lot, especially in high school, and playing basketball and being a small Asian female who plays basketball.
Me too. I was a point guard.
I love that. I mean, we don't really have much choice. It's some sort of guard at our height. So I would go out and go to outdoor courts and see people there. And there were times where in high school, I'd just go alone. There were times I'd go with friends, but if I went alone, I kind of just walk up to people and ask if I could run with them. And I think that being able to sort of just put myself out there in that sense helped a lot with it. It informed a lot, I think, of who I am. And especially in business, being able to put myself out there, that's something that I have to do constantly. And you have to have thick skin for that. And I think thick skin probably comes partly from being Asian and growing up with Asian a Chinese grandmother who was very direct about weight and other things in my life. And living in Beijing for 5 years, where it was what I got from my grandma, but magnified even more. So I think there are just so many different parts of my journey and my history that have informed where I am today and who I am today.
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about the circumstances of moving to Beijing and how that experience was and different from living in San Francisco and maybe other parts of the world that you've lived in?
It was super different. It was not really my plan. So I studied psychology at UCSD. Didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. I thought about sports psychology and didn't really want to travel for my job. So after college, when I graduated, there was the opportunity to do 2 6-month internships in Beijing. And so I was just going to go for a year, kind of try it out, see if I liked it. and then come back. So while I was there, I was just thrust into this environment that was brand new. The culture was very different than what I was used to. My first job there, so I was working in 2 hotels. My first job there was in a local hotel, and I had to stand in the lobby and greet people. And at the time I didn't speak Mandarin. So I moved over there without speaking Mandarin. I grew up speaking Cantonese because my family is from Guangdong province, and my mom grew up in Hong Kong, but I didn't speak Mandarin. And so I just stand there and greet people. I had to learn the language. And I think within 6 months or so, I had learned it well enough to be fairly fluent and at least get around and order what I needed to off a menu, which was most important. And it was just a very, very different experience. And I'd gone not knowing anybody there. But when I went there at my first hotel that I worked at, I became close to these 4 girls who 3 of them were from China. One of them was Japanese, but she spoke both Chinese and English fairly well. So when I first moved over there, she actually was kind of like an interpreter between us. And between the 5 of us, their English improved, just being able to practice with me. My Chinese improved much faster than I think other people who move over there and then they just are in the expat scene and aren't really as immersed in the local scene. So that helped a lot. And I think that feeling of community, again, is also something that has always been a big part of my life. When I was in college, I love to plan things. So I would plan dinners for my friends to get together. I would host events at my tiny apartments on campus. I've always loved to bring people together. And so when I moved to Beijing, this place that was so far away and so foreign to me, having grown up Asian American, it was kind of crazy how even when I moved there, I was able to find that community, and that's something that I really, really treasure. And I think when I think back on my experience living in Beijing, that's what I remember. I remember the friendships that I made. I remember the fact that when we first met, all of us were single. And then by the time I left 5 years later, I think all of us were married at that time. Maybe one of them wasn't. And I've since gotten divorced since then. And a couple of them have had kids. And so we've just seen each other through all these different life stages and kind of grown together. And then when I started Kono's Kitchen, when I moved back, that's something that was really big for me too, was starting a community, not just a dog treats brand, but starting this community that was kind of inspired by me feeling very isolated because of my dog who struggles with reactivity. And initially me just not knowing what it was, not being able to understand it or to understand him and what he was going through. So a big part of me starting Kono's Kitchen was, again, it came back to community. It came back to wanting to build this community of pet parents who were just doing their best and trying their best, who weren't perfect, who were going to mess up every once in a while, but would learn from it, hopefully, and be able to support each other.
It sounds like human parents too. And I'm a dog mom plus a human mom. So I think that there's a lot of parallels there. But let's take a step back, because 5 years, what you thought was like an internship rotation turned into 5 years. What led you to stay there for that many years?
It's a long time, especially considering I had never thought about moving to China. I had considered maybe Europe. So I figured maybe after college, I'll go to Spain and I'll spend a couple of years there, or Paris, but never China. And I think once I was there, I feel like I definitely gained a greater sense of who I was and a greater sense of the Chinese part of Chinese American. But I remember when I first got there, just feeling it's stuck in between. I remember trying to explain to my coworkers who were local that I was Chinese American, not just Chinese, because they would look at me and they would say, no, you're Chinese. I don't understand. Like, your family's from here. And then I would take a taxi in Beijing. They would hear my accent and they'd say, are you Korean? Are you like, they couldn't, I'd say, no, I'm American. And they just wouldn't believe me because I didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. And so that was a really interesting thing to kind of go through and sort of confront my identity and confront like what I was, like what part of me is Chinese, what part of me is American. Is it possible to have this like third space where you're Chinese American, and that in itself is an identity? But going back to your question, so I had planned for a year, and then about a month before I moved back to the US, or planned to move back, I met my ex, and we started, or I had actually met him earlier on. And so we started dating about a month before I moved back. And then I did move back home for 6 months, and I was living in LA. My mom was in LA at the time. So I did move back home for 6 months, and we did long distance from China to the US. It was super long distance. And so we did that for about 6 months, and then I moved back to Beijing. He was a big part of it. He was a big reason, but I also felt like at the time, my time wasn't up living abroad. I felt like I wasn't ready to stay in LA and to settle down in LA. And so I still wanted to go out there and to live overseas and to travel a little bit more throughout Asia. So I was able to do that while I was there. And then somehow I ended up staying for 4 more years. Got married while I was over there. So I had a very traditional Chinese wedding in a village. And that was a pretty cool experience. And then my ex and I moved back to the US. So this was, I think, 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. It was a while ago.
Could you describe the traditional Chinese wedding? Because for some people, they may not know what that looks like.
Sure. And it's funny because I actually wanted it a little bit more traditional than it was at the time. So typically, and this varies from province to province and even from village to village, but where he was from, I was staying in a hotel the night before. And so usually they'll send a nice car, like a BMW or an Audi or something, to come pick you up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you gotta show face. And so they send the brand name cars. And so there was a car that came and picked us up and brought us to the village, but I also wanted the traditional palanquin. So the sitting in the chair with the people carrying you in it around the village, and they were able to get that. And I remember stepping outside and seeing these 8 older ladies. They were probably, they looked like they were in their 60s to 70s or older. And I just remember thinking, how are they going to carry me? Like, they're these little Asian ladies, but they actually were a lot stronger than they looked. And
I'm sure. Carrying people around.
It's a workout. It's more of a workout than I'm getting nowadays. But so they were fine. And I think the way that the bamboo, because it was the chair was held up by these pieces of bamboo. So I think the way that the bamboo was laid out, it distributed the weight in a way that was even enough for it not to be too heavy for them. So I sat in that and then went around the village for about half an hour or so.
Wow. They carried you for half an hour?
It was a long time. I had no idea it was going to be that long. I thought it was maybe 10, 15 minutes. So they carried me about half an hour. And my ex-brother-in-law had given me these coins that were wrapped in paper, like red paper. And he told me that every time I go over water, I'm supposed to toss one on the ground. And I took it literally. I think it was a translation miscommunication. So I took it literally. So I would see a little puddle of water on the ground and toss the coin. And then I found out like years later that it was supposed to be like bodies of water. So if I'm crossing over like a river or stream or something like that, then I toss it. But I was tossing it anytime I saw water on the ground.
That's hilarious. Well, you hear my dog's deep bark in the background.
Yeah.
So now that you come back to the US, and I don't, as much as you feel comfortable with, I mean, how was that transition to being a couple in Beijing over to then being in the US, and kind of starting a new chapter in your life?
It was not easy. I have met people in China who were very keen on moving to the US and very much wanted to experience life in the States. I had even dated people in China who straight up told me that they just wanted me to take them there, which I don't know why they said that, because that was a huge red flag and I just ended things. But my ex was not one of these people. He was somebody who had imagined himself staying in his village forever with his family. He was very close to his family, so I understand. So the transition was not easy. And then I think with traditional gender roles in China, that was also not easy, even though that wasn't something that he really communicated, because we just didn't communicate. And that, I think, was the biggest thing. And so even though I suspected it could be an issue, it wasn't something we talked about. So when we were living in China, we basically were working in the same industry. I think he was probably working at a higher level than I was, because he was in the industry for longer. And then we moved back here. We moved in with my mom, which was not easy for him because he just didn't get along with my family. And so that was a really difficult transition for me, because I'm really close to my family.
Mm-hmm.
So after we moved out, I found a job at my current company. So I found a job as a front end developer, and then I've been with them for many, many years now. So kind of worked my way up. But when I was in that position, during that time he was here, he did a lot of restaurant jobs and random side gigs, and a couple of things at once, never really sticking to anything in particular. And I would try and encourage some sort of sense of a career if that's what he wanted, or just trying to figure out like what that was. And it ultimately, due to many, many different factors, it just didn't work out. I think that was one of the factors that he never expressed, was that it was not easy for him that I was the primary breadwinner.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a very traditional background and traditional village. So yeah, that.
I mean, that's a really difficult transition. And I imagine, again, communication is difficult when you are starting a new relationship and transition. I mean, yes, you were dating and married, in Beijing, but
Mm-hmm.
coming here, that's a whole new ball game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, changing the environment where it's the other person's now native environment is completely different.
What did you learn about yourself throughout the marriage and after the divorce?
So much.
That's why I ask.
I think I learned just how important communication is, which sounds like something I should know, right? It sounds like something that I had been telling myself for so long. But what I didn't really think about was how it manifested in a partner. And part of that is I didn't really casually date when I was younger. I didn't really date very much before I moved to China. So he was really my first serious relationships. I hadn't had very much experience. And so through that was all the experiences I was getting. I also didn't have anything to compare it to. And in terms of communication at my age as well, I think that I got married at 25. We were maybe 23 when I started dating. And since then, the person who I am now compared to back then, I've grown so much since then. I've grown so much. I've learned so much about how to communicate, how I need to be communicated with, and what it feels like for me to be taken care of, and what I'm looking for in a partner. So I learned a lot about what I didn't want in a partner through that one experience. And it was unfortunate that it had to be through a marriage because I didn't have that dating experience. But I also learned, I think I've known all along that I would have been okay by myself. I'm somebody who's always been very independent. I was raised by a strong single mother. who's also a therapist. And so being raised by her, both my sister and I, we were raised to be very independent. And so I've never felt like I needed to have that person in my life. But I think I've since learned, I've learned a lot about what I want in a partner. I've learned a lot about how to do life by myself and to thrive and to be okay with that, and kind of just accept whatever life throws my way.
Definitely. And it shows that you have tremendous strength and adaptability and flexibility. I mean, that is a test of character. And the whole idea of knowing yourself is a lifelong process, but you also need to know what you don't want. And sometimes that happens by being in situations that make you really uncomfortable and you finally call it. And I think that's a growing experience for most people. And especially the youngins that are listening in their 20s, for instance. I mean, you learn so much. You have these, I had these preconceived notions about what success was and what things should look like. And then as you grow older, you're like, to hell with that. Like, I'm just going to be unapologetically myself and just live true to my values and who I am.
Yeah, that's something I've really loved about getting older is I feel like I have a lot more confidence in who I am. I don't care as much about what other people think. And I'm just excited to do things the way that I want to do them. And especially with my ex-partner, I think a lot of what I was doing, I was living my life for him. Like I made so many sacrifices and just in so many ways, like even little things like not going out with friends. I definitely lost a big part of myself when I was with him. And like I said, I was always very social and pretty extroverted when I was younger. I am now too, to an extent. But when we moved back, he didn't want to go hang out with my friends. He didn't understand the notion of getting to know my friends. He just figured they're your friends. Why do I need to get to know them? And so he would never want to go out with them. And I would feel guilty that he was home alone in a foreign country. And so I would not go out with my friends. I would stay at home. For years, I would make excuses. I'd say he's feeling sick. I'm not feeling well. I've got work tomorrow. I'd make the same excuses for family functions. I lost a lot of myself. And I think since then, it's been a really, really good journey of not just getting back to who I was, but obviously you're not the same person, right? Like there's a lot of growth that comes through experiencing something like that. And I think not only did I get back to who I was or get a sense of who I used to be, but I feel like I've also grown so much more since then.
How do you deal with conflict? Do you struggle to drum up the courage to ask the other person to talk? Or do you feel resentful, hoping your frustration will go away after enough rationalizing? If you want peace and relief exclusive to closure, visit www.adaptingleaders.com for a free 30-minute consultation to see how coaching can give you clarity and confidence to resolve conflict. Absolutely. And thank you so much for being super honest about that, because again, a lot of people post pictures on social media about their weddings, and those are really lovely. With my kids, and I've said this in other podcasts, but I've told my kids when I used to read the fairy tale books, and they continue to work on their marriage for the rest of their lives, as opposed to happily ever after, because I think I want to give them that sense of being in a relationship is hard. And my husband and I are coming up to 21 years together. And
wow.
We've spent most of our lives together. And so I think it's really important to know that it's not a fairy tale. It takes a lot of hard work. And when we really break down communication, we're not just talking about speak nicely to each other. We're talking about, hey, that bothered me. Hey, this is not what I expected. And this is not how I like to be loved. And having that back and forth communication, because a lot of people just bottle stuff up and it brews there for years.
And I think that can be hard. I don't want to say when you're younger, because I don't think it's necessarily an age thing, but if you yourself don't know how you want to be loved, then it's hard to communicate that. So I think a lot of
Absolutely.
that growth, it's so you really need somebody who can grow with you. So as you're learning that about yourself, you're able to communicate that with this person who won't then say to you, well, this wasn't what you said to me a year ago, but will understand and grow with you.
Mm-hmm. Support your growth
Mm-hmm.
and support each other's growth.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as an Asian American woman, a badass Asian American woman, I might say, because you have a job in technology and you started this business, one of the things we talked about is it's very easy for many of us to overwork ourselves and exhaust ourselves. So, what have you learned in your professional journey and how have you coped with reducing burnout?
I've learned that I didn't actually understand what self-care was until this year.
Tell me more.
Yeah, that's what I've learned. I've learned a lot about what I don't know. Um, so I think in the past, I'd always looked at self-care as almost the Instagram definition. So get a massage, go do yoga, and all those things can be self-care, right? It depends on the person. But I think for me, it wasn't until I started feeling burnt out and started acknowledging it. So not even just feeling it, but acknowledging it and wanting to change it and wanting to do something about it, that I really started thinking about what self-care meant to me.
What were some
And to,
signs that, sorry, what were some
oh
signs
yeah,
that you can tell us that you started noticing?
exhaustion, but not just physical exhaustion, like physical, mental exhaustion. It was a lot. It was, I mean, at one point last year, I was, especially when I first launched Kono's Kitchen, I was working until 2, 3, 4 a.m. most nights, probably for the first 6 months or so. And then I started working with a business coach and we started trying to address that, first of all, and setting boundaries. So exhaustion was a lot of it. There's a lot of anger, but not at anything in particular. I think I would just be working on stuff and just be angry that I'm still working on it, and angry that now I don't have time to work on other stuff and I'm going to have to put it off to the next day. And that's going to prolong growth of my own company, or just angry that I couldn't be sleeping right now. There was a bit of, I think, an element of apathy was also something that I recognized, and hopelessness, feeling like I'm just going to keep pushing through because it doesn't matter. Nothing's going to change. It's always going to be like this. And then at a certain point, I think I realized I need to take control. Like, this is my life. It was actually very similar to how I felt when I made the decision to leave my ex. Was, I remember there was one night, it was just weighing on me, and I was lying on my side and I was thinking about the rest of my life and thinking, this cannot be the rest of my life. This is not how I want to live the rest of my life. And realizing that I don't have to. And when that thought came to my head, it was, I think it was really, I don't have to, because this is my life. This is my choice. And so I can make that choice to leave. I can make that choice to choose happiness over whatever this is that I'm stuck in. And it was very similar, I think, this year, where I decided there are certain things that I may not be able to control right now necessarily, but there are certain things that I can do for myself. And it's been hard with COVID because I love to try new restaurants and to travel and to like hang out at breweries. Yeah. And so that's been really tough. And it's something that I didn't realize until this year that it had actually affected me. But now I'm fully vaccinated, things are kind of opening up
Congrats.
again. Thank you. It was, man, it was huge. It was crazy how like emotional I got when I got vaccinated. It was really weird. But now I think what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take some time away, whether it's a weekend, whether it's 3 days, whether I'm working remotely from a different location, and just have some time away from the city, away from the house, where I can be in a new environment and just decompress and spend time with my dog.
I wasn't very aware of reactivity in dogs. Can you describe that, and also what he adds to your life?
He adds so much to my life. It's hard to describe that in a nutshell, but he adds a lot of joy. He adds a lot of laughter. He's very derpy. He's such a dork. He makes me laugh all the time, whether it's rolling on his back or the faces he makes, or there's a lot that he adds. And with regards to his reactivity, it's actually really, really common, but it's a spectrum. So reactivity, as I understand it, is overstimulation. So it could be the little dog that's yapping at everything, and I know a few of those. It's a little dog that's yapping at people and skateboards and things like that, and it could be fear. Reactivity could also be frustration based. So they're frustrated that they're on a leash, they can't get to that other dog. They could be friendly, but they can't get to that dog because they want to say hi. With Kono, it is fear-based, as far as I can tell. So it's fear-based. It's typically a lot of larger dogs. When he sees them, he will bark. He kind of lunges, but he sort of lunges and then jumps back a little bit. And he's basically telling them, like, get away because I'm afraid of you. And I don't know what to do, and I'm on a leash. And fight or flight, right? You're taking away flight because you have them on leash. So all that's left is fight. And so that's what I see that pretty often too. So that was something that I didn't understand what that was in the beginning. And then as I got deeper into the Instagram community, I started learning a bit more. I started meeting other people who had similar dogs and struggled with similar issues. And then around that time is when I started looking into raw feeding for Kono, which is the initial inspiration for Kono's Kitchen. Or build a brand of freeze-dried raw treats that would be easy to feed, that I could use during training, because since day one, I've been obsessed with training him, and it's been something that's been so fun. And the past 6 months, I've grown, I feel like, in my knowledge of training and just as a handler with him. And in the past month or so, I just wrote a post about this. I realized that training with Kono has become something that I am doing not just for him, but also for me. Like, it's become something that, like, I have a really stressful day and all I want to do is take him to the park and do 180s in a parking lot and work on heel or work on recall, and just do all these different things that can help him be in a better state of mind, help him be able to go out with me to certain places, help him to settle down when he's in a new environment and not be as nervous. Like, these are things that, yes, they're for him, but because it's become such a hobby and a passion of mine, it's also kind of relaxing for me as well.
Well, it takes your mind off of a stressful day when you are focusing on just, being in the moment and giving back the love that he gives you. I have 3 dogs. Now, interestingly, they all have different problems. They're all seniors, but like my firstborn, he's 16 years old. And so he's kind of that grumpy older dog who just like wants to be left alone. And then you have my Pomeranian who, poor guy, like he's blind in one eye, and he likes to be free, meaning like if you leave the door open, that guy's gone. Like, one of those things. He's just a free spirit adopted dog. And the wiener dog that you just heard, like, yeah, he does that reactivity thing too, where if he sees a big dog, he does this like weird yelp. It's almost like they're hurting him, and it's like, no, dude, like, it's fine. So can you just imagine walking down the street with these 3 dogs with different things? It's like, oh, don't touch the oldest one. And
yeah,
so it's definitely been an adventure, but it also teaches you that dogs have different personalities too, and that it's a lot of work. People think, oh my God, puppies are so cute. And I'm like, I've had these guys since, they were puppies, and the Pomeranian as a 1-year-old. It's like, it takes a lot of work so they don't shit in your house.
It's a lot of work. Yeah. And it really is so much more than people think. I actually read not an article, but I saw a headline the other day that a lot of people are returning pandemic puppies, which is really sad. I'm not super surprised, but
Yeah.
it is really sad. I think people get one during the pandemic because they're like, oh, it's a good companion, it can keep me company. And then they don't realize that it actually takes so much work. And with a lot of rescues, especially, there's so many behavioral issues I think a lot of people just aren't prepared for. And so that was a big part of starting Kono's Kitchen too, is I was in the same position. I didn't realize that there would be all these behavioral issues to work through. And I just didn't know where to turn. I didn't know where to look for support for that. And so being somebody who is going through that every day, like this is something that we are constantly working on and that may never fully go away because of who he is, because of his genetics. I wanted to be somebody for other people who were going through the same thing. So especially people who were getting their first dogs and didn't know what to do, didn't know what kind of food to feed. And I'm not a nutritionist, but I could point them to resources, or didn't know what types of gear they should buy, didn't know how to handle the emotions of this dog that they had brought into their lives. And I can't do this alone. Like, this is why I want to build a community, right? Like, I want to be able to connect people and have them connect with each other and be able to support each other through these different challenges that they're going through.
Yeah, that's really important for mental health. And also just knowing and having someone walk you through the ropes. And I'm thinking of the Pomeranian that I told you, my middle one. And we think he was abused because when we first adopted him, he was very skittish. He wouldn't eat. He literally got off leash, and we used to live, there was a forest behind us, and I chased that guy in the forest. I was so scared because I'm like, this guy just left, And so he really had a difficult time, eating and adjusting, and he would kind of dart and kind of bite people if you pulled him out from under the table. But that we were pretty empathic about it. But I imagine that people getting rescue dogs and don't understand the behavioral challenges can be really stressed out.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I've talked to so many people who have I cried about it a week ago. And it had been a while since that happened, but it's tough. And then when you go through that and then you feel like you're the only person experiencing it because everyone else has these normal dogs, quote unquote, it can feel so isolating and so lonely. But then you realize that there actually are a lot of people going through the same thing that you are. Like, this is actually a lot more common than people think.
Absolutely. So tell me kind of your ongoing vision with Kono's Kitchen. And I know that you're wanting to support, other animals that are going through very difficult times. Where can people find your products?
So they can find it online at konoskitchen.com. It's just www.konoskitchen.com, or through the Instagram shop, which is Instagram handles at It's Kono's Kitchen, ITS Kono's Kitchen. If you're in San Francisco, you can find them in Maxwell's Pet Bar in Noe Valley. And that was really special for me to have my treats up there, because even though I'm based in LA now, that's where I spent my childhood. That's where I spent 11 years of my life. And so it was really cool to just connect with Jen and Christy, who are the owners of Maxwell's, and have my treats in their shop. I have a couple of friends who have gone by and sent me pictures from there, and it's kind of surreal to just see it on the shelves.
That's amazing.
And then in LA as well, I believe they're in Found Coffee in Eagle Rock, if you're in the Eagle Rock area. And then on the west side, I believe it should still be at Demitas Coffee.
That's amazing. It must be so surreal to see your products out there. I mean, how did you choose the designs? Because this is a huge thing. a lot of people have great ideas, but in terms of implementation and picking, what product to actually put out there and the packaging and all that, how did you go through that process as an entrepreneur?
I had a vision of what I wanted the branding to look like, but I'm not a visual designer. So I set off to find one. I think I had asked some friends. So the designer that I worked with came recommended by another person who was recommended by a friend of mine. So I worked with him for, I think, a little over 6 months before I actually launched. So we worked on the logo and the branded, the packaging we worked on together, the branding for the sample packs we also worked on. So a lot of different things. And it was really cool to just see it come to life. I think I had a very set idea of what I wanted it to look like. So he would show me certain things and I know what I don't want. And so I'd kind of point those out, make a few adjustments or give some feedback. And he'd come back and I'd be like, yep, that's it. So I think definitely something that I need to do more of, but something that I did do, I think, well when I first launched was working with somebody who has strengths that I don't. So even though I have that vision for the company and for the products and for the packaging, I don't really know where to start. I don't know how to bring it to life, but I can find somebody who does. And I think that's something that as I continue to grow Kono's Kitchen will be very relevant to many different parts of my business because I am not great at many different things, but I can find people who are great at many different things.
How do you vet these people? Because I think a lot of times, we go with people that we trust, that we know, but there are a lot of talented people out there. And so just for up and coming entrepreneurs, can you kind of give us some advice on how you do that?
I first had a phone call with him. He had experience specifically with package design. So that's something I really liked. I also vetted his website, his previous designs. He sent me some examples of things that he had designed in the past. And I just really liked his style. And so we had talked about my vision for the company. He seemed to be somebody who really believed in what I was doing. And he's also somebody who is very passionate about social justice. And that's something that I really enjoy as well. And so I think for me, vetting somebody is not just vetting their talent, but who they are as a person and do their values align with mine.
Absolutely. Well, that was very, very well said. Any other plugs that you have for your business or for any other up and coming projects that we can look forward to?
No projects in particular just yet. I have a couple small things launching on the site soon, but for now I've got treats. Find me on Instagram. That's where I'm most active.
Yeah, you respond very quickly. So definitely she will respond back to you. I wanted to end the interview with some fun questions. And one of which is if you could have any superpower or ability, what would it be?
Flight.
And why?
I would absolutely love to fly. I just think it would be really fun. I feel like I have so many dreams where I'm flying. It's in my subconscious somewhere. It sounds scary, and I think it would be really scary if I was actually that high up, but there's something about the ability to just get up and go wherever you want and be there so much faster that really appeals to me.
Yeah, I was watching Jupiter's Legacy. Shout out to Chase. We basically are watching the piece where there's teleportation. And I was thinking, oh, that would be so cool. And then I was like, it will never happen, even if it's like scientifically possible, because how can you regulate people like just going into random places? But it just seems so cool. Like you could go get your groceries in Korea and come back with these wonderful strawberries.
That would be so cool.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
So another question I had was if you could meet anybody, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Anthony from Queer Eye.
And why?
Because I have a huge crush on him, first of all. And fun fact, his dog has had our treats. His dog
Oh my
Neon.
gosh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I was so stoked when I found out. Like, I did a treat box last for the holiday season. And so I was able to send him a box, which is crazy. And then he had since actually purchased. So he was actually a customer of mine, which is really, really cool. He just seems like somebody who would be really fun to hang out with. I love food. And so I would love to cook with him, not just have them cook for me, which would also be nice, but I would love to just cook with him and hang out with his dog. And yeah, I think it'd be a fun night.
Well, we're putting it out in the universe. So,
We
I
are.
mean, you already have him as a customer. I mean, what's the harm in having a meetup with your dogs? Like, really?
Exactly.
Well, any other positive message that you wanted to impart to the audience today?
I think for people who are listening and want to start their own business, know that you don't have to know everything. It seems so daunting when you think of it in terms of not knowing where to start, not knowing how to look for someone to design all your packaging, things like that. Pretty much everything that I've learned or that I've done with my business, I Googled. So there's a lot of information out there. Relationships are also really important. So for me, a lot of potential Instagram lives or potential partnerships are through people that I've met on Instagram and people that I've not just met, but really connected with and become friends with and share lives with each other. So relationships are really important and you don't have to know everything.
And that's with life, not just with business people.
Yes.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your wonderful stories. We'll definitely be friends moving forward for sure.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing my story.
Thank you so much for listening to the Color Success Podcast. Listen, like, subscribe on all major streaming platforms, YouTube, IG, and if you want exclusive content, you can join our Patreon. All links can be found at colorofsuccesspodcast.com.